Just reading through some of the comments, we have Zayn, not to mention that it takes an abundance of patience. Rocky says this is mind blowing. And then Zayn once again says, absolutely loved hanging clothes, very fitting to the local character.
Awesome. My presentation is going to be a little bit more on the technical side of things, because I know a lot of you will be very curious about specifically how you do things technically. So I'll show you a quick presentation, but also at the end, I'll show you a example Photoshop file setup, which kind of brings in all these complexities and compositional layers to kind of give you an idea about that. So my presentation is going to go through some of the drawings that I find I get a lot of questions on. It's also worth saying that I have been, there's also a link in the YouTube description linking to my podcast episode with Eric, because as you guys might know, I'm the host and producer of the Two Worlds Design podcast, where Eric was actually our third guest, and we went through some deep narrative insights and basically what we're doing here today, but in a long form conversational style with a lot of tips that you can check out. And it was actually following that podcast episode that he inspired the crap out of me, and I went off and tried to do my own version and my own style of drawing. So thank you to Eric again for inspiring me and helping me get the best out of my drawings too. So so these are some of the drawings that I get a lot of questions about, so I will quickly go through. So it says showpiece drawings because what I'm trying to convey today is we are very much talking about showpiece drawings, the types of drawings that will take very long for you to do. They will take a lot of care and love, as Eric said. These aren't the types of drawings that you're going to pull off in one day. Hell no. These are the types of drawings that take weeks, months to do. So that's very important to just say off the bat. Expect a long journey with these things. It involves a lot of patience. The other key thing about these drawings is that it's all about selling a narrative. It's all about finding what you're trying to say with your project. What is the story? What is the political what is the political statement you're making? And if you guys watch the episode with Eric and I, you can see him kind of expressing all these things to me and blowing my mind, and hopefully yours too, if you go and check that out. So, it's very important you guys find what your narrative is of your project, and you need to be very vigorous with your sketching and figuring out the kind of killer views, if you like. By the way, Eric, I talk very fast and without many breaks. So if there are questions you want to interrupt me, just
I will do. When I see it. I'll do.
So this is another drawing, obviously, that I get a lot of questions about. So another thing it's very important to express is what I've kind of mentioned already, is that there is no easy way to do this. So easy way versus shortcuts. The reason I've said that is because actually they're two very different things. There is no easy way, but there actually are shortcuts. And the fact that you're sat here or standing or running, I don't know how you're consuming this content, the fact that you're here watching this means that you are now going to have an idea of a particular shortcut, which is hopefully kind of learning from everything Eric's telling you and some of the techniques I'm going to share with you today. And the other aspect of this is quite interesting point to say is, we actually zoomed in on Eric's drawings, but he said don't zoom in too quick, too close. I would say the same, perhaps maybe for the same reason or a different one, but there's an interesting notion of being lazy or being intentional, and I think the idea of intentionality is a very interesting thing, which you only start to realize once you're doing very complex drawings. The scope for you to do things intentionally it increases drastically. That might make a bit more sense later. So I'll get into it very quickly. So here's an example of composition or composing a drawing. So for these drawings that are super detailed and you're showing crazy perspectives or crazy kind of visions of architecture and the world and the environment, there's various ways you can do it. I actually came up or decided on this way, which was to essentially compose my drawing of various different multimedia kind of techniques. In the example you're looking at, I had the task I set myself, which was a bloody difficult one, which was to try and draw a refugee camp. Now, a refugee camp, as you can see, is so dense, it's so detailed, and it's such a arduous task. But it was so crucial to me, and I also realized, look, you know, to be very blatant and kind of bold about this, I took pride in the fact that it was a massive challenge. I took pride in the fact that it was a massive challenge meant that not many people were probably going to take on that challenge. So it motivated me more to take on that challenge. And I think this is an underlying theme with all of this, with Eric's work as well. You know, these are difficult tasks. They take time and they take a lot of effort, but it's worth it in the end. Technically, what you're looking at is my drawing on the right. Obviously, it's not the same drawing, but the value of also tracing. Um, there are various things that also come into play with your drawing, but one of the big ones I think you'd be silly to not make the most of is tracing, and remembering that it's not cheating, it's not illegal, it's not pastiche, it's not looked down upon, as long as you're doing it in a tasteful way, in that it's part of your composition. And the beauty of tracing is you can start to make details unique. You can start to introduce your own aspects to your drawing. The other aspect to kind of creating these crazy drawings is, you know, I showed you the kind of this is all hand drawing on the right. It's using an iPad and Procreate and dropping in color manually. So there are various ways. I think one of the questions was, how do you add color to your drawings, or how do you add shadow? There are various ways to bring in your kind of rendering, to bring in your shadows. In this example, what you're seeing is a SketchUp model export, essentially me trying hard to find what is the perfect view and getting that view to match with a photograph, which, for example, if this was the back or base photograph, I find a view that fits perfectly on this photograph. And then you can export your render, you can export your shadows, and it will fit perfectly to your view. So there's a lot of trial and error here, and it's the preliminary process, or kind of the preliminary part of your drawing, which is the most important, in my opinion, where you are composing your drawing in a very rough and ready way. So you can see there's a slight variation actually in the angle, because it's trial and error, as I said. And the notion that the drawing is never finished, something we get told a lot, or you might have heard, and that is 100% true. On the left is actually a drawing that I quote unquote finished for my part 2 in first year at masters, but on the right is a drawing that I just developed the same drawing into something even more crazy, kind of continuing that narrative. So I think these are all very important concepts. Another thing, now we're kind of zooming into these giant drawings, is to embrace the imperfections. And this ties into a point I was mentioning earlier, where you will inevitably have points in your drawing where you are not going to be doing things completely accurately, and that's the beauty of the tracing process, as I mentioned. So
Sorry, Hamza. There's a question that came through from Bella Blessing, and he said, "I never used Procreate for rendering, but that sounds like something to try." And then they asked, for the refugee camp, did you use a brush since the walls look kind of textured?
yeah, good questions. Sorry if I confused anyone, but I didn't render with Photoshop, if we're referring to render as the process of adding kind of color and texture. With Procreate and my iPad and the tablet, I was only adding in the line drawings. So I was only adding in the raster, and I'll come on to the whole raster versus vector, because it's very important here. I was using that just to do the line drawings. In terms of the textures, for example, what you're seeing, there's a cool thing that you get from actually overlaying a color drop on top of a photograph. So what you're seeing here is actually the photograph that I was tracing, but there's aspects of the walls that are mottled and textured in this way. I kept them in there. There are areas where I obviously took out texture and kept it. I think there's all sorts of playful things you can do there. But also, I'm sure if you guys have used Photoshop, you know you can add texture in just by, dropping and overlaying and multiplying, or, soft lighting in any photograph or any texture. So there's various ways you can do it. Scale is another really important thing here to remember. Obviously, the foreground and the background, as Eric was showing, certain things are going to need more detail, obviously, because they're at the front, and certain things are going to need less detail because they're at the back. But nonetheless, if you're able to draw the person's vision to the fore and the background, you're creating a very, very rich drawing with depth, which makes a drawing powerful. Nuances is an incredibly important part of your drawings as well, and it ties again into the idea of what you trace and what you choose to trace and what you choose to leave out and what you add into your drawing. So, for example, these vehicles were just the right photograph. It might take you hours to find the right photograph, guys. So you spend time finding the right photograph to complete your composition, bring it in, trace over it. It doesn't always have to be a model, because I would never have been able to get, this typical Palestinian van with a very genuine number plate without really looking for the perfect photo. The things like rust and all these things, they're a mixture of me adding my own details in and also, using what's there. So nuances really make your drawing, give your drawing character. And as you see over here, I didn't even hold back from the Arabic lettering on the hoarding. So it's a really exciting process. Although it seems daunting, when you're in this world, it's bloody exciting. And as I mentioned, characters, Eric had shown his amazing characters. Make sure you're very intentional with your characters. Make sure you're choosing the right people to inhabit your vision. For example, my vision was to create a kind of self-sustaining, kind of self-build community, people who were self-sufficient, and that involved a lot of ad hoc building, kind of procedures by the locals. So what we have here is a local man who is operating a very kind of ad hoc crane system, and that will sell the vision which I was very keen to sell. So be intentional with your characters, 100%. Draw your own characters, as we said, either through a photograph or even getting your friend to do the pose you want them to do. And this is the, for example, the drawing that is being developed further, and I'm talking about micro composition now. You have the macro composition, which is the entire composition of the drawing, but micro composition refers to actually now the details. Always be cognizant of what you're putting in your drawing and why you're putting it in there. And a very interesting thing to bear in mind as well is to make sure your drawing or design language is consistent. If you're envisioning a kind of a perfectly modern contemporary kind of architectural vision with glazing and all sorts of modernist aspects to it, you're not going to use an industrial kind of vernacular or these kind of proper factory like design aesthetics. You're going to match exactly what your design concept is, and that you should reflect that in your drawings all the way down to the minor details, to the way in which the antennas and the actual the details of the stands of these antennas are. It should match your style and your design. Something Eric was mentioning as well. Another huge thing to remember is another thing that people might believe is a illegal thing to do or something that is distasteful, but copy and paste is a good friend of yours when doing drawings this complex. Try to make use of the same components, especially vector components, and try to find ways to build up the detail using components you already have and you've already designed. Especially with your characters, I think you saw from my drawing, you can see from my drawing and Eric's drawings as well, depending on how he's done it, but I definitely have copy and pasted characters, because you'd be silly to maybe do 100 characters where not everyone's going to see every single character. And this is a very important image, because if you look at the bottom of this image, you can see bold, clean vector lines. Excusing this clothed line, these are all vectors. This is actually from the SketchUp export. There's moments of drawing in from Illustrator, and there's moments, if you see in the background, where I've actually drawn in from Photoshop. The vector versus raster thing, to quickly summarize that, is the idea that I was using vectors for the foreground because on Illustrator, because that is where people's eyes are going to be more focused on. Therefore, the detail needs to be a lot more refined. And in the background, I used very, very rough raster lines, i.e., Photoshop, because no one is going to be able to tell the fact that, look how crap these windows are. They're like little circles, which this is really rough line work. But we're talking of a really large image and being very efficient with your time. And so what I'm going to quickly do is show you the actual Photoshop file for this image, so you have an idea of this whole compositional layering technique I'm talking about. So if you guys, you can see this, Eric, yeah?
Yeah, we can see this. Thank you.
Okay.
Diane added that love the rawness that came out from hand drawing.
Oh, awesome. Thanks, Diane. So what you can see here is the photograph. This is the photograph I traced, and I'm not ashamed to say it. I'm actually proud, and I'm actually, I take pride in being able to reveal sort of the myths that a lot of people feel are behind drawings. There is a huge. You should never feel ashamed of tracing, because there's a huge level of skill involved in tracing properly and tracing correctly. And as I said many times in this presentation, making the drawing your own and kind of introducing your own details and elements. So what you see here is a very, very important step in this process, where I have found my perfect view for the SketchUp model exports. All these white areas are SketchUp line exports of the view I really wanted to get. If you remember from my presentation, this is what I had modeled in SketchUp. And then I'd taken this and brought it into a photograph. And because I spent a lot of time making sure my view matched my photograph to end up with a very strong kind of visual composition. At this stage, the next step is to, just for clarity, is to bring in the line work. So this is bringing in the line work of the model, of the actual 3D model, but also the grueling task of doing the vector line drawing of all of the details. Now, if there are any questions of how you do these kind of how you end up doing such crazy details, we can get into answering them if it's not already self-evident that it's just hard bloody work and blood and sweat and tears. This is a crucial stage of you adding in your lines, and I am almost ashamed to say that this is all vector lines on Illustrator. It took a very long time, but the effect was worth it. I ended up with drawings that I'm probably the most proud of. So there is no real kind of myth there. That's literally Illustrator tracing on top. But as I said, choosing what to bring in, choosing what to hide. And then there's another layer. If you missed that, I'll do it again. So taking it out, bringing it in, another layer of Illustrator lines that I've brought in. Actually, I believe these might be in the beginning of the raster, the Photoshop lines. Yes, so these are actually not Illustrator lines. These are Photoshop lines. So these, as you see, they're a lot more rough, these lines, because as I said in the previous slides, no one is going to pay too much notice of these details. But in terms of the full composition, it's hugely effective. And then it's just a matter of building up that detail slowly and surely. So here's the next layer and the final layer. And because this is a huge file, my laptop is struggling. And there is the final layer. So you can see it's a long process. And then the next stage for this is to bring in your color. And if you were going to bring in, I think the color is, again, a very scary process. But in my case, I first brought in the renders and the question about shadows, which was asked. You can see I've exported the actual materiality and color with shadows. So I'm bearing in mind where my shadows will be casted and bringing in the render. And at the same time, I won't go through that, but I essentially went in with a wand tool and added color to everything. So it's a bloody long process, but it gives you remarkable results. And that is it from me. I think we're all bang on time again. So
Wow, perfectly on time. That's great. And just wanted to add, just reading through some of the comments, we have Zain, not to mention that it takes an abundance of patience. Rucky says this is mind-blowing. And then Zain once again says, absolutely love the hanging clothes. Very fitting to the local character.
awesome. Thanks, guys. Zain